So good morning, everyone. This morning again, we have Professor P.K. Vedanthan from University of Colorado. He's a professor there, and he runs an organization called International Asthma Services, who provide a number of teaching facilities and programs globally and especially in India. And they run programs with CMC Vellore. And Professor Vedanthan currently is a visiting professor to Postgraduate Institute of Medical Education and Research, Chandigarh. We welcome Dr. Vedanthan for the talk today. And the topic today is chronobiology of asthma. Professor Vedanthan, please.
Thank you, Dr. Meenu Singh. Thank you for the kind introduction. And I'm very happy to participate in this lecture series at PGI Chandigarh as a visiting professor. I'm honored to do so. Thank you very much again. So I'm going to share the screen now. As Dr. Meenu Singh was saying, the topic is chronobiology of asthma. Let me get that. Okay. This topic is a very interesting topic. At the same time, has been a topic that has been observed by clinicians for many, many years. We actually observe it. We see patients telling us every day, in their history, I had a lot of problems at night, but during daytime, I'm not that bad. That type of very casual type of statements are there. And when you ask the mother, how is your child doing now? Had a very difficult time last night breathing, but now he's much better. That type of observation, we take it casually, but actually what it is the chronobiology of the disease. And ancient medicine, Ayurvedic physicians, and several other ancient medicines across the world had recognized this phenomena. They actually were practicing chronotherapy based upon this chronobiological phenomena, circadian rhythm. So this is a very old phenomena, but we have had a lot more exposure to it, a lot more scientific explanation of this very unique branch of medicine. It's almost like a branch of medicine now, only in the recent years. So few terminologies here we need to follow. We use this word circadian rhythm. Circadian rhythm is sort of a rhythm that follows our physical, mental, as well as behavior, as well as bodily functions, just between day and night over a 24-hour period. Like Earth rotation is once in 24 hours. You have day and night, you have sunlight and darkness. It's sort of that cycle. It follows that cycle, interestingly. And so circadian rhythm is a 24-hour cycle. We also have this diurnal variation that is between morning and evening, that type of thing. So this is circadian rhythm. Chronobiology means the study of the circadian rhythm. There are so many different types of circadian rhythms affecting different body systems, different disease states. Even it affects drug metabolism and several other activities. And many of our lifestyle are sort of related to it. And all of these things are different types of circadian rhythms comes under this umbrella term called chronobiology. And we have this biological clock within us. We have this regular clock on your wall, but you have an extremely efficient clock inside your system. It's called biological clock. We comment about it casually, but actually this clock is extremely efficient, quite complicated. And we will talk about that in a minute. And we also have what we call as a master clock, which is in the brain. And that keeps the whole thing in sync. All these millions of clocks that we have inside our system, it keeps it in sync along sync with each other as well as with the environment. So we have one central clock called which is located in the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the hypothalamus. That is where the central clock is there, and that is also called master pacemaker. Then you have these peripheral clocks. Peripheral clocks are present in 8 cells. It is present in the cells in your skin, in your GI tract, respiratory tract, in your immune system. Any cell that you take in the body, there's a clock is there. Clock is basically, it is not structurally like what you imagine, but actually it is a protein material, and there is genetic material. That is what they work as a clock. And so actually every cell in our body has this. These are what we call as peripheral clocks. And it is just amazing how complicated, at the same time how efficient this system could be when you imagine that we have 40 trillion cells in our body and you have so many clocks, and they work 24/7, 365. And the way they transmit the main clock, how it connects to all these peripheral clocks is through neuronal pathway as well as a hormonal pathway. So if you look at the mechanism of chronobiology, you have this central timing which is maintained by this suprachiasmatic nucleus, and that is in the hypothalamus. And there is a connection between the suprathalamic nucleus and the retina of the eye. Through there's a connection, and the retina receives the light, and as well as the other stimuli are also fed into the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and that's synchronized. And the stimulants that are feeding that information, they are called Zeitberg-Gebers, or they are also called timekeepers. And that could be in the form of food, it could be form of activity. So all these information, and it could be in the form of drugs, it could be in the form of disease patterns too. All these things are fed in, and then the central clock will sort of synchronize it with these peripheral clocks, and then these biological functions are synchronized based upon the environment, based upon the input. So it is a very, very efficient system that maintains this network as well as the function. So the clock has got a lot of genetic material which is involved, and these are called clock control genes. They are present in all the cells, in the airways, as I told you, in the skin, the gut, the immune system, and it is the same mechanism in all the cells. It will tell the cells what the time is, and all the cells know the clock time. So they know exactly how to function based upon the information they get. So circadian rhythm, circa means about, Diane means a day. It is our own timekeeper. It is very efficient, it is accurate, and it keeps a track of all the daily alterations in the rhythm in the environment. And this sort of is in sync with all our bodily functions. So I'm going to play a small movie about the origin of this particular phenomenon.
Chronobiology is rooted in the work of 18th century French geophysicist, astronomer, and scientific journal editor Jean-Jacques Dortout de Marin. This director of the French Academy of Sciences in Paris spent the majority of his time in research and consulting reference books at his desk, from the early morning until well after dark. This led to a striking observation. The ornamental plant on his windowsill, a Mimosa pudica, demonstrated distinctive day and nighttime rhythm. Every morning its foliage opened, and every evening when the sun set, its foliage closed. This aroused the scientist's curiosity. How did the plant know whether it was morning or evening? Was the sun the key to the answer? And how would the plant respond when placed somewhere entirely free of sunlight or active knowledge of day or night? These questions led to an experiment. The astronomer and publisher of a well-known scientific journal placed his houseplant overnight in a cupboard. Of course, there were no cameras at the time to monitor the mimosa during the night. However, the next morning when he opened the cupboard doors, a startling sight awaited him. The leaves of the plant were completely unfurled, although it had had no direct exposure to sunlight that day. The scientist concluded that the mimosa must have some sort of built-in biological clock that let it know what time it is. These observations and findings marked the advent of chronobiology, a field of science that examines periodic phenomena in living organisms and their adaptation to solar and lunar-related rhythms. The science itself began to gain serious attention in the 20th century. Scientists have since proven that there are environmental clues that set the pace for all organic forms of life, plant, animal, or human. However, we're far from having all the answers. In the Chronobiology Research Department of Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich, scientists are working to isolate the genes that set the various modes of our biological clocks. They've been examining mold cultures, which demonstrate 24-hour cyclical behavior. But might its genes house the key to unlocking the secrets of our own biological clocks?
Naturally, the genes responsible for keeping mold's biological clock ticking differ from those that run our clocks or those of a mouse or a hamster. In all likelihood, the biological clock reinvented itself numerous times over during the course of evolution, so that plants, microorganisms, mammals, and insects all have distinct genes that run their individual clocks. On the other hand, looking at the genes present in mold, we can get a basic idea of how they make up a biological clock in simple organisms, and then apply this general framework to animals and plants.
Auf die Funktion von anderen Genen in anderen Tieren oder Pflanzen.
Although chronobiology is not a young science, the metronome that rules our lives is still far from being decoded.
So this gives you an idea that although we are talking about daytime and nighttime based upon the sun shining and sunset and all that, but it can happen independently. That is, you can be in artificial light and still have your circadian rhythm still working for you, but it can get sort of disturbed because of some of these factors that can sort of affect the rhythm to some extent. These are what we call as Zeitgebers. That's a German word. These are the external factors. This is light, food, activity influences the circadian clock. And they need to be in unison, but because of the difficult lifestyle people are facing now with all the type of globalization that is occurring, people working like nighttime shift, daytime shift, people working in different times, they were especially the pilots, their circadian rhythm gets sort of mixed up. And so that can cause both physical problem, mental problems, as well as certain disease patterns. So this was a phenomena that actually was sort of evaluated, and when there were three scientists who were awarded the Nobel Prize for this discovery of the molecular mechanism of the circadian rhythm in 2017. So it is a recent phenomena where this has got a lot of recognition. So summary is, we have a central clock in the hypothalamus. We have peripheral clocks in all our cells, billions of cells, and we have genes in each of these cells, and they control the action of these clocks. And this rhythm is called circadian rhythm, is influenced by the earth rotation. Now, how does it affect the allergic disease? Now, circadian clock can influence the epithelial integrity. Now, we have talked in our previous presentations, one of the basic defect in allergic disease is compromised epithelium. The filaggrin deficiency, the defective tight junctions, adherent junctions, the lack of the cementing in the between the cells in the skin, so it makes it more porous. This type of activity is made worse by the circadian clock influencing the integrity of the epithelium in allergic individuals. It can also influence the immune function. That means it can affect the different type of cells that are involved in the allergic inflammation, which we are going to talk about it in a few minutes. So this dysfunction in the circadian clock, which can easily occur because of the lifestyle, can overall influence the allergic disease in an adverse manner, because it can affect this epithelial integrity as well as the immune function in these individuals. So what happens in these individuals is we know that allergy is a classic disease where there is gene-environment interaction. The genetic defect is the epithelial barrier function is compromised. You have a dysregulated immune system at the same time. That is the Th2-driven pathway. And the environment has got several components in it. It could be inhalants, it could be ingestants, it could be injectants, it could be medications. So all these things can play an adverse role in affecting these individuals. Say, for example, atopic dermatitis, eczema. You have a lot of these very uncomfortable itching and significant leaky epithelium of the skin. So you have epithelial dysfunction in these patients, and especially at night, the disease, allergic diseases are much worse. And that is when the activity of the disease pattern is much higher. And that is because of this circadian rhythm problem. Same thing happens with asthma, where the asthma flare-ups are more likely after midnight, and between midnight and 4 a.m. is when you have significant amount of asthma flare-ups because of the similar mechanism, because of the epithelial dysfunction and immune cells dysfunction. And food allergies can also be influenced by the same mechanism. Because of the epithelial dysfunction, the mucous membrane get much more porous, the integrity of the tight junction is compromised, and that makes the individual more prone to have significant reactions. So does melatonin have any role in it? Melatonin is a substance that is produced by the pineal gland, and in the sleep cycle, it does promote sleep. In some cases, there is not a whole lot of evidence that is very much supportive of it, but melatonin seems to help in children who have got atopic dermatitis, maybe improve the sleep pattern a little bit. And it also has some immunomodulatory function, anti-inflammatory function. So it has got some action, but nothing striking. Now, this I have already covered, I'm sorry. Some of the environmental variables in allergic reactions are irregular eating, using computers at night, sleep disturbances because of that, as well as stressful situation, different shifts of work, and jet lag because of the travel. All these influences the pattern of the Zeitbergers, that is the input into the thalamus, and which can mess up the actual circadian rhythm, and that in turn will affect the disease pattern in allergic individuals. So allergic disease is a dynamic disease. So it has got a definite diurnal variation. There's a difference between morning and night. Usually it is much worse at night. So this variation can be manifested clinically. It can be manifested immunologically, molecular, as well as therapeutically. So you need more medications to control the allergic problem, more medication to control the asthma, more medications to control atopic dermatitis, especially at night rather than in daytime, because it is much worse at nighttime. And that is because of the epithelial dysfunction. So, and say like changes in the skin is, again, as I mentioned to you before, the entry of the allergens is much easier at night because of the increased permeability, causing significant allergic inflammation. And there's a substance called aquaporin 3, which actually regulates the entry of the stratum corneum. This has been shown both in mice as well as in the human, where it seems to alter the skin barrier by changing the water content of the epidermis. And that is exactly what happens with these circadian disturbances. Say in the gut, the same thing. The clock disruption can impair the intestinal barrier integrity, and that causes the leakage of these food particles. And that is because the clock regulates in the tight junction. There are different proteins called occludin and claudin A, and clock regulates this. And when it is sort of disturbed, the pattern becomes much more dysrhythmic, and that causes increased porosity of the intestinal tract to different food antigens. Epithelial barrier again is compromised here. In the airways, same mechanism happens, and the tight junctions, the mucus producing goblet cells, ciliated cells, epithelial derived cytokines, chemokines, all these things constitute the respiratory barrier, and that gets disturbed. And there's a gene called BMAL1 gene, seems to have played a significant role here, and seems to deregulate the airway defense mechanisms. So the summary here is environmental factors influence the clock control. All these different items that happens around us. Clock dysfunction leads to allergic disease promotion, and this dysfunction affects both the epithelium as well as the immune response, and genes play a significant role here. So innate immune response, this same mechanism can affect every immune cell. It could be mast cell, basophil, eosinophil, macrophages, lymphocytes, and dendritic cells. All these cells can be affected by the circadian rhythms. So mast cells have their own clock actually, and they respond to messages from the suprachiasmatic nucleus. They release mediators in response to the activation through IL-33 and causes the changes. So targeting the mast cell clock is a valuable target for chronotherapy down the road. And eosinophils also play a role here, but the direct role of the clock has not been demonstrated as far as the eosinophil goes. And the dendritic cell has also been noted to be affected by the circadian rhythms. So if you look at this diagram, the main thing that happens is the epithelial barrier function is affected, and the different immunological cells are affected, the mast cell, to eosinophil to some extent, the dendritic cell, all these things, basophils, all these different cells are affected by the disturbance in the circadian clock activity, and that in turn will influence the allergic disease. So this is an interesting phenomena where the red line is the immune response associated with allergy, that is the allergic inflammation, and the black line is the epithelial barrier function. If you notice, epithelial barrier function, when it is adequate, the inflammation is low. when the epithelial barrier function is low, like at night, the inflammation is more. So there seems to be sort of an inverse relationship between those two. And that is exactly what happens, especially in the allergic diseases at nights. The immune response is much stronger when the epithelial barrier function is not working. And it has been also sort of speculated, maybe this immune response where there is increased inflammation, maybe it is a protective thing. The body is trying to protect itself by getting swelled up, by producing all this inflammation against an attack by helminth or biting arthropods like dust mites. It is sort of getting prepared for such attacks. So that is sort of a speculation where they think maybe it is a defense mechanism of the body more than anything else. But because of the defense mechanism, because of the inflammation that could be occurring, even if it is defense mechanism, the disease pattern increases because of the allergic inflammation. You have a lot more symptoms because of this inflammation at night. So the concept here is called chronoallergology. It's a newer concept of circadian rhythm regulating the allergic response. And this response seems to be more defensive or protective to some extent in nature against these microparasites or arthropods. This is probably more of a speculation rather than a real thing. We still do not know. The allergic immune response may temporarily complement the epithelial barrier function, but this actually clinically it is manifested as more disease pattern, more flare up of the symptoms. Whether it is actually how much it is helping the patient is difficult to evaluate clinically. And the epidemic, there was a study done in Ramadan, where a month-long religious festival among Muslims, where the study was performed to study the effects of this prolonged fasting daily on the asthma condition. But actually, they seem to improve. So this sort of was a little bit, we are not too sure how to influence it. Maybe it is the type of, the fasting probably might be helping to keep away from certain type of food that could be causing more flare up with this GI reflux or asthma. But seems these children seem to improve after fasting, which is not very uncommon to see. But the modern lifestyle overall definitely causes circadian rhythm disruption, and that in turn promotes or makes the existing allergic disease worse. Circadian rhythm actually is a potent regulator of allergic reaction. It seems to be affecting in a two-pronged effect, as I mentioned before, epithelial disintegrity and dysregulating the immune response. These are the two ways it does that. So this slide is summarizing that allergic diseases are classical examples of gene-environment interaction. It is a dynamic disease. Circadian rhythm influences all aspects of allergic phenomena at different levels, and allergic diseases are very classic examples of circadian activity. If you look at allergy and asthma, for chronotherapy, this knowledge has helped us to treat these diseases in a little different way. So instead of changing the dosage in the manner of increasing the amount of medication, we basically are now trying to see whether we can just time it differently. The disease is more at night, so you try to treat more aggressively at night. So the dose response curve is based more upon timing rather than just dosage alone. So if you look at this interesting clock, we use the word acrophase. Acrophase means a peak incidence of either the disease process or physiological or disease process. And if you look at it at different times over the period of 24 hours, different disease pattern seems to peak. And there is maximum epidermal mitosis at the midnight, and you have significant asthma around 4 o'clock, and you have rhinitis when you get up in the morning. there are so many other diseases that occur in the early morning, like myocardial infarction. Angina is very common in the early morning. And you have the best lung functions around 4 p.m. or 16 hours 16. And the blood pressure and cerebral hemorrhage is more common at night. So all these different things is showing that there are peak incidence of different diseases at different hours. So this is because of the chronobiological phenomena. So based upon this, you can sort of target your treatment. For example, for asthma, you probably would like to give more medicine that at night so that it peaks during those hours rather than during daytime. Say, for example, if you are treating with long-acting theophylline, you want to give a preparation where it peaks, seems to peak between 12 midnight and 4 a.m. rather than during daytime hours. So this was a study done by Turner Warwick, a very incredible study where they looked at a huge number of patients, 8,000 asthmatics, and 39% of them had daily night symptoms, and 64% had 3 nights every week. So they had very, very frequent nocturnal symptoms, and they found that asthmatics have a lot of difference between day and night, and maximum symptoms was in the early morning hours. So if you look at the PFT, this is basically a peak flow rate between, and as well as FEV1 between a normal patient and an asthmatic. There is some variation in the normals between day and night. So it's probably around 8 to 10% decrement of the values at night compared to daytime. But whereas in asthmatics, it could be 20%, 40% difference between day and night. So there's a huge dip at night in asthmatics. And that is because there are several things that have happened at night. Is bronchodilator response is blunted, decreased beta-2 adrenergic receptor activity, lowered functional capacity of the beta-2. So there are not only less number of beta-2 receptors at night, they also function less. And there seems to be a lowered response to the steroid binding receptor and lower binding of the steroids also that happens. And these are all based upon studies done on patients at night. So this was done actually, this was a study that was done at National Jewish Hospital in Denver, where these patients were actually had all these bronchoalveolar lavages, methacholine challenge, all these lung functions done at night. So this was like a all night type of thing. The number of patients were very, very few, but 24 patients or something like that. So, but the information that the investigator obtained were very, very useful. On the left-hand side, you can see between as the day progresses into night, the bronchial hyperresponsiveness increases. That is, and actually that it is worsening of the asthma. So you need very little methacholine to have a positive bronchial response at night compared to daytime. And the airway resistance on the other side keeps on increasing at night. So you have the worst lung function at 4 a.m. and the best lung function at 4 p.m. And you have a very high bronchial responsiveness, the hyperreactivity at night compared to during daytime, and you have much higher airway resistance at night. And so what it is showing is the lung functions really drop in the early morning, and it can drop around 25 to 40% easily. And bronchial hyperreactivity significantly increases, and sleep is associated with marked worsening of the airway resistance. All this happens mostly at night. And that is one of the reasons why you have nocturnal asthma. All these different mechanisms are involved in the resultant nocturnal asthma, where you have less cortisol, less epinephrine, more inflammation, more inflammatory mediators, more interleukins, like IL-4, IL-13, IL-33, increased vagal tone, decreased temperature, all these things influences by producing higher reactivity of the bronchial airways, and even the upper airways, the sinus areas, all these things, as if you have allergies, they flare up at night. All these things combination causes the resultant nocturnal asthma. And they have done this bronchoalveolar liquid bronchoscopy at night and found that BAL showed elevated eosinophil count at 4 a.m. and peripheral eosinophil count maximum at 12 midnight and much less during daytime, and elevated lymphocyte count at 4 a.m., elevated IL-2, IL-4 pro-inflammatory mediators in the early morning hours. So all these things are showing that at night is a different issue with people with asthma. And this slide is showing the effect of treating when you treat these patients with corticosteroids. And this was where they gave dosages at 8 a.m., 8 p.m., as well as 3 p.m. And what it showed, the results were the single dose of prednisone at 3 p.m. prevented the fall of FEV1 and that seems to work the best. The 3 p.m. dosage of prednisone also caused the least adrenal suppression, and single dose, even full dosage, single full dosage of inhaled steroid 3 p.m. was as effective as 4 times a day. And so what it all means is in these selective patients, the number is small, but it may not be applicable for all our patients. But if you have a patient where you are having problem controlling their asthma, because you're doing everything right, but still their asthma is worse, one of the things you could do is change the timing a little bit. Instead of giving the morning, evening dosage of the inhaled steroids, or the morning, evening dosage of just the morning dose of alone, if they're on systemic steroids, is to give the systemic steroid or the total dosage of the inhaled steroid in the afternoon, 1 dose at 3 p.m. I have done it myself in my practice on selective patients, and it seems to make a difference in those patients. But it may not be true for all patients, but in some patients, it does make a difference. So just changing the timing of the dosage might be beneficial in selected number of patients. So this, what we are trying to do is trying to use the knowledge of chronobiology in a therapeutic manner. So chronotherapeutic intervention would be, for example, theophylline, you would like to go ahead and give it so that the peak level occurs when you really need it. So instead of giving, like peak level occurs between, let's see, so giving at 6 p.m. rather than at bedtime is preferable. If you give it at 6 p.m., the peak effect probably would be occurring around when they need it, around, say, after about 8 hours. So about 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. like that. That is when you need the more theophylline rather than at 6 a.m. or 8 a.m. So it peaks when you need it. LABA is also effective when it's definitely combined with ICS, and anticholinergic also seems to play some role. So one of these things, what I wanted to impress upon is maybe these type of information might help the clinicians to find some sort of a lifestyle intervention to better control allergies down in the future. And so, because asthma and allergies, as you know, is a lifestyle disease, and it is a well-studied disease in regard to circadian changes. And a classic example, it is the timing that is very crucial rather than dosing, increasing the dosage in these diseases. So I will stop here and entertain any type of discussion.
Thank you, PK, for this fascinating talk and on a very interesting subject. We had never given it such a deep thought into circadian rhythms and chronobiology of asthma. And I think it's a hugely researchable topic because, and you've also shown how important it is clinically to modulate some of the therapies which could be started, changing the time of administration of steroids, for example. We usually give steroids in the morning and, thinking that, there is an early morning nadir in steroid levels. So somewhere, after breakfast, we usually advise people oral steroids when they have an acute attack or a flare-up. But as far as inhaled steroids are concerned, your thoughts on, giving inhaled steroid dosage in the afternoon, say around 3 p.m., I think one can do a study on this and see how good that is. And you've already shown that there are some effects. Another thing is about sleep, because sleep also is a very related thing to chronobiology. And you've shown that people who have sleep disturbances, I mean, this could be both ways. It's true, asthma leads to sleep disturbances and sleep disturbance could lead to increased inflammation. The question I have for you is, does it apply to all inflammatory diseases, the disruption in the normal chronobiology, or is it only a certain set of diseases? For example, all inflammatory diseases, I think, could be affected by sleep. What are your views on that? Because you've given a very deep insight into this particular subject, actually.
I think a lot of inflammatory diseases are much worse at night. We have seen that. And you take rheumatological problems, cardiovascular problems, gastrointestinal problems, dermatological problems, respiratory problems. A lot of diseases have overlapping, the same interleukins, the mediators are affected in many other diseases, including disturbed sleep pattern itself is an inflammatory disease.
Yes.
Itself is an inflammatory disease. So, and that seems to share the same type of interleukins. So that I'm sure there is a lot more work to be done here. And we have seen this pattern where inflammatory diseases are definitely much worse at night. And we have to think about how we treat these diseases is to probably help these people by giving pharmacological therapy, which will peak their action at night rather during daytime. And one of the problems has been the type of research that we have done, clinical research, is during office hours. People come and they work and they study these patients. They do all these drug levels and the pharmacokinetics and all that between 8 o'clock in the morning and 6 o'clock in the evening. But the disease actually is different at night. So the research has to be sort of done at night when the disease is much more significantly worse. So that will give us a lot more revealing facts about what's happening. So there's a lot of work to be still done. And that clock is very, very interesting. I showed you that chronobiological clock. So that will give us an idea where diseases are peaking at different times of the day and night.
The acrophase, which you showed, that all these diseases are affecting human body at different times of the day. And I think that's also very, very interesting. I wonder if a lot of work has been done on this. This must be not being researched at a very basic level. Need to really study human physiology. And you showed the movie which you showed, which was more related to plant physiology. And even the plants have the ability to remember, to have that memory clock. That's what it showed.
Every living being, including unicellular organisms, have this property built in. And it was actually detected accidentally by this, he was an astronomer, a French astronomer, who actually detected this plant change, how it happens because of his curiosity. And then most of the work has been done only recently. So this field has a lot of potential for research.
Yes, that's what I think.
And
Even
a
the
lot of
space
skill,
travel, even the space travel which is taking place, which takes you in different time zones, I think it's also something which may predispose people to diseases, especially the astronauts who.
Yes, totally messed up schedule they will have, including our own people, with this IT industry, with this globalization. People from India are taking care of what's happening. American companies are employing so many of them, and they are working at different times, and people here are working for Indian companies. So their sleep pattern is very much disturbed, and that definitely has led to a huge disturbance in the circadian rhythms in these people, and they develop a significant disease patterns because of this. So this has a lot of potential that we should be able to study further.
And coming back to asthma, as you showed that even the mobile phones and the iPads, etc., which children and adults use sometimes at night, they lead to sleep disturbances, as well as because the biological clock will be affected.
Because of the light.
Yeah,
yes.
That may lead to more allergic diseases.
Yes. So actually these suprathalamic, this nucleus, that central clock is disturbed by not only internal things, not only a disease pattern, but is also disturbed by external factors. And one of the things that really disturbs it is this light in the middle of the night, having this light, especially I think blue light has a lot more.
Yeah,
blue light has a lot more. Blue light has a lot of deleterious effect. And all these influences and the type of and also stress. If the people are going to sleep with a lot of things in the stress in their mind, it can affect the circadian rhythms again. And food, the type of food.
Yes, and one of the papers you showed was that it was also affecting the microbiome. So it's
it affects the microbiome.
The microbiome, which has such a huge regulatory effect on our body and our physiology, and also on pathology, the diseases which occur. I mean, this must be at the root, one of the root causes actually of various diseases.
Yes, when we are talking about all these lifestyle diseases, this probably is one of the very, very important major component of the lifestyle disease.
And I think this would then need to get into, first we need to do research, generate evidence, and then this really needs to get into the guidelines. For example, maybe we don't have to wait for that, because these are some things which were so akin to nature, which have got disrupted because of technology, lifestyle, and other things. So there is a need to take it back, I think, to the basics. I don't know, what are your views about that? Yeah.
That is that would be the most effective but very difficult to do.
Yes, yeah, that's what it is, because it's very difficult to change people's habits. You may give them drugs, they may comply with them, but very difficult to change the behavior, I think, as far as lifestyle is concerned, I think. So probably that is one cause which we have to keep educating people about, and keep telling them how they need to grow their children. I mean, how children need to grow up and imbibe, values which are more healthy. But of course, it's a very difficult situation. And this pandemic actually has led to so much of disruption. And people are now exposed to screens so much more. The children are exposed to screens, I think, 1,000 times more now. And because they don't have schools, they have to talk to the screens all the time. And other thing is that so many other effects actually have taken place about sleep and disruption of lifestyle.
It's highly disturbed now.
Yeah, so I don't know whether one is going to see a surge in surge in allergic diseases following the epidemic, the pandemic.
It will cause, other thing it can cause is not only physical diseases, it will affect mental diseases also.
Yes, that's become a topic by itself these days. Yeah.
Yeah, it can also cause mental disease.
And that's why people say that psychological factors are so important in asthma, in causation of asthma, as well as in causation of flare-ups.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And even the psychological aspects, I don't know how much they have been studied, but now it's like a fourth dimension with the chronobiology, which includes everything. Because even psychological problems will affect chronobiology, will affect sleep,
Yes.
will affect behavior.
So they're all, I think they're all interconnected. Then it
Yes.
goes to the immune thing. If circadian rhythm is disturbed because of sleep problems or stress or whatever, the immune cells, the immune mechanism is involved again, secondarily involved, and that gets disturbed, and that actually flares up the problem much more. So it's a sort of a vicious cycle. So this is sort of a cycle where each one eats into each other.
We don't see many questions in the chat box, and I think we will now let you go to sleep because
No problem.
It's time.
No, I sort of work. I could have made it a little more clearer, some of the pictures, but I will see, because I was working on it. Then when you called me to come on, I did not find that particular PPT. So
Okay. But it was so relevant, and you've given us so many research ideas for primary research, as well as for doing systematic reviews of what literature already is available. And I think this kind of biological research will benefit patients, and also clinical research about the timing of medications and timing of other interventions as well.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you very much for this wonderful talk. I really enjoyed it. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Namaste. Thank you. Good night.
Namaste, sir.
Have a good day.
Yes.